Okay. Um, Thank you all for joining us in this training today. So this training will be recorded and sent out later on, probably tomorrow, alongside our ArcGIS story map that we're using for today's presentation. And there is a Q&A function in the Zoom here. So as we go through the training, feel free to leave any questions you have in the Q&A, and we will get to them at the end of our training today. Um, so again, thank you all for joining us this morning. So this is the training for the Lesser Celandine Seekers, which is a springtime survey effort with Pennsylvania IMAP invasives. My name is Brian Daggs. I'm the invasive plant ecologist with the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program. I'm joined by Amy Jewett. Amy, would you like to introduce yourself real quickly?
Everybody. I am Amy Jewett, the Pennsylvania IMAP Invasives Program Coordinator, also at the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and the PA Natural Heritage Program.
Okay, and without any further delay, let's get into it. So what is the Lesser Celandine Seekers? So the Lesser Celandine Seekers is a new community science event being hosted by the Pennsylvania IMAP Invasives Program. So for our veteran IMAP Invasives users, many of you might be familiar with some of the other events we've hosted, such as the Invasive Species Scavenger Hunt and last year's Jumping Worm Jamboree. And this event falls into a very similar vein. If we have some, newer folks who might not be as familiar with the IMAP Invasives program, IMAP Invasives broadly is a online GIS-based database for invasive species presence and absence records, as well as a place to store records for management and invasive species removal efforts. So in this event, the Lesser Celandine Seekers, participants will survey for potential habitat for the invasive plant Lesser Celandine throughout Pennsylvania. And by doing this, you all, as participants, will help PA IMAP invasives and our partners establish a pretty comprehensive understanding of Lesser Celandine's distribution in Pennsylvania. So this survey event is going to take place from March 1st, this Saturday, up through April 30th. So an entire 2 months. And we're doing this time period to target the part of the year where Lesser Celandine is blooming and most easiest to recognize when out and about in the woods. So what is Lesser Celandine? It is a also called a fig root buttercup to some people, with the scientific name Ficaria verna, is a perennial herbaceous spring wildflower or spring ephemeral that was introduced to North America quite some time ago, back in with the earliest record back in 1867 in Philadelphia, in some kind of garden or horticultural context. So since that introduction, Lesser Celandine has spread out into natural areas where it's starting to outcompete native flora, and it often grows uncontested in places like lowlands, floodplains, and disturbed habitats. So why are we targeting Lesser Celandine through this effort? Well, despite its long history in Pennsylvania, Lesser Celandine could still be considered an emerging threat or even an early detection priority, depending on the specific region in Pennsylvania that you're looking at. So while it's taken over many urbanized parts of PA, like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, there's still lots of rural parts where it is very rare or absent. And we sort of see that here through various reports that we've collected through IMAP invasives and iNaturalist over the years, that it has a pretty dense presence in our urbanized areas, but rural parts in the middle of the state, it's still fairly absent and might even be new to certain parts. So lesser celandine tends to form very dense kind of ground cover carpets. And these carpets often displace a lot of the native plants from their natural habitat. Most often we're seeing lesser celandine overtake lowland areas, floodplains, as well as various urban areas or areas that are, disturbed by human activity. So native spring ephemeral wildflowers are often the first species displaced by lesser celandine and are easily the most heavily impacted. So this includes plants that can often be rare or endangered in Pennsylvania, like white trout lilies, spring blue-eyed Mary, pictured here, or snow trillium, pretty rare species of trillium. So lesser celandine typically emerges a lot earlier in the year compared to our native spring ephemerals. This often gives it a pretty competitive edge and enables it to grow and spread without having to compete for light or space several weeks before our native plants are often blooming uh, here in the spring. And so by displacing all these native spring ephemeral plants, lesser celandine also starts to disrupt the natural cycles of our spring season. So by pushing out native plants, it's reducing food sources for pollinators and insects early on in the year where after they're coming out of dormancy. And this can have cascading effects across the ecosystem, impacting all sorts of other wildlife that rely on those native insects, which in turn rely on the native plants. So this starts to disrupt the delicate equilibrium that we have in our ecosystem and disrupting the interactions between species and their environment. So as a spring ephemeral plant, lesser celandine can often coexist with a lot of other invasive plants that tend to dominate later in the season and can sometimes pave the way for those other invasive plants to establish in natural places. This can include species such as Japanese knotweed, reed canary grass, and bishop's goutweed. Lesser celandine also lacks a lot of the many fine and deep roots that typically hold soil together and prevent erosion. And so as a result, when we get large infestations of lesser celandine, they tend to create these types of barren soil patches later in the year after lesser celandine has senesced and finished growing for the spring. So these patches become highly susceptible to erosion, which also exposes the lesser celandine tubers, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second, and can aid in lesser celandine spread, often along streams and rivers. So how do we identify lesser celandine? What are some of the distinguishing features we can look for to identify it out in nature? Well, lesser celandine, as we've established, is a fairly low-growing, perennial, herbaceous plant that is in the buttercup family. Some taxonomists and experts used to actually place lesser celandine in the genus of true buttercups, ranunculus. However, in more recent years, those experts have recognized that there are some key differences between lesser celandine and true buttercups that warrants its placement into a separate genus, Ficaria. So lesser celandine typically grows in clumps that sprout these dark, heart-shaped or kidney-shaped leaves that have sort of rounded teeth along its margins. So the lesser celandine flowers are this, bright golden yellow color, and they're typically borne on kind of longer stalks that shoot up from the leaf clumps. These flowers are kind of glossy. They're about 3 to 5 centimeters in diameter, and they typically have 7 to 12 petals on them. The underside of the flower has three kind of yellow-green sepals, which are these leaf-like appendages that enclose the flower petals. So in like this picture here, you can clearly see the larger bright yellow flower petals, and subtending those are these leafy sepals underneath. Lesser celandine produces many small tubers below ground and in certain species above ground in its leaf axils after they're finished flowering. So these might look like little potatoes, but these tubers are not for eating. They're generally pretty toxic to people, along with all parts of lesser celandine. I do not know if that toxicity translates to wildlife or other animals, but that might be the case. So tubers are often in little clusters like this, just below the surface of the soil at the base of the plant. And like I said, in certain subspecies, they actually start to grow tubers above ground in their leaf axils. Kind of control or natural checks and balances, these clumps start to become densely packed, which start as they spread through a habitat, which creates these monotypic or single species carpets along habitats. A bit of a bonus challenge if we happen to have any, more advanced botanists joining the Lesser Celandine Seekers this year. There are actually 5 different subspecies of Lesser Celandine that you can find in Pennsylvania. So if you might be someone who's a bit more botanically savvy, I challenge you to look at this dichotomous key and see if you can identify your findings to a specific subspecies. However, this is certainly not a requirement to join in on the event this year. Just a bonus challenge if anyone would wish to challenge themselves. There are some look-alike species that we do want to be aware of when looking for lesser celandine, and these typically are also in the same family of plants, the buttercup family. Most notably, the most obvious look-alike species is marsh marigold, Caltha palustris. So marsh marigold is a native plant in the buttercup family that is typically found growing in these wet, waterlogged areas like swamps, marshes, seeps, and sometimes floodplains. Lesser celandine so, like lesser celandine, marsh marigold typically grows somewhat low to the ground, has heart-shaped leaves, and produces these golden yellow flowers that are characteristic of many buttercup family species. However, marsh marigold is generally larger, both in its leaves and its flowers, and its overall height compared to lesser celandine. And the flowers of marsh marigold almost always have 5 petals and 5 sepals beneath them. Marsh marigold also thrives in very wet habitat conditions that lesser celandine typically doesn't tolerate, although there is a bit of overlap in their habitats. Another noteworthy lookalike to be on the lookout for is creeping buttercup, Ranunculus repens. So creeping buttercup is actually another introduced species and might be invasive in certain contexts that can resemble lesser celandine at a quick glance. Both of these are low growing, they occupy similar habitats, and have these distinctive buttercup family golden yellow flowers. However, creeping buttercup, like marsh marigold, typically has 5 petals on this flower. This one happens to have 6, but typically has 5 petals and 5 sepals. And unlike lesser celandine and marsh marigold, creeping buttercup's leaves are compound and lobed. They look like this, very different look to the leaves. So what kind of habitat is lesser celandine found in? Well, we've sort of hinted at this a lot already. In Pennsylvania, lesser celandine is going to be most common in our urban areas and human impacted areas where it was initially planted in gardens or where tubers could easily spread as a soil contaminant. So this is going to be places like disturbed forests and young succession of forests and woodlands, could be people's lawns, in gardens, or any other kind of area that's sort of left fallow and allowed to grow wild after being utilized for whatever human purpose. In natural settings, lesser celandine prefers habitats that are seasonally wet and occasionally flood, but are typically not permanently waterlogged. So it especially loves sandy soils as well. So this is going to include habitats such as floodplain forests and meadows, lowland forests, riverbanks, and other, alluvial landforms that are made out of sand, gravel, and cobble. Lesser celandine also tolerates a variety of shady and sunny habitat conditions, which opens up a wide variety of habitats for it to grow in. So how does lesser celandine spread? So typically, it mostly spreads through vegetative reproduction by way of its tubers. So this is the most common dispersal method for lesser celandine populations. These tubers will easily break off of the parent plant and then resprout to create a clone. The tubers are also easily moved by water and eroding soils, and because lesser celandine often grows in proximity to rivers, creeks, and streams, those tubers often move with the water and soil as those creeks flood and move soil downstream. So often you'll see lesser celandine infestations will follow and spread along watershed boundaries downstream from its original introduction point. And there's just another glance at what these tubers look like, in this case, in some very loose soil. So moving outside of watersheds, lesser celandine tubers most easily spread into new watersheds by hitchhiking on mud and soil that might cling to things like boots, bicycles, various machinery, vehicles, or any other kind of gear that's being brought to natural areas where lesser celandine is established. So often as a accident, often as an unintentional consequence, outdoor recreationists can accidentally facilitate the spread of lesser celandine and other invasive species that have similar dispersal techniques. So fortunately, there are a lot of very common sense ways that we can make sure we're not vectors for invasive species dispersal as we're surveying for them. I have a video embedded here highlighting a few common sense ways to prevent the spread of invasive species I'm not going to play it here, but this story map will be free for you to explore later on, and you can certainly look at this video on your own time. So where is Lesser Celandine found in Pennsylvania currently? At a broader scale, Lesser Celandine can typically be found all over Pennsylvania, with the most obvious concentrations that we've seen near our big cities, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, as well as other smaller cities and towns. So reports of Lesser Celandine are much more scattered and sparse in the rural parts of Pennsylvania. However, when we start to look closer, we see that Lesser Celandine infestations tend to stay contained within watershed boundaries. This means that at local scales, there might be many smaller watersheds where Lesser Celandine is only present at a few places or is completely absent altogether. In local watersheds where Lesser Celandine is only emerging or absent, we are presented with opportunities for some early detection and rapid response removal. So included in the story map is a map that we're going to explore very quickly, which divides Pennsylvania up by Huck watersheds. If you're not familiar with Huck watersheds, they're basically sort of basic units that the United States Geological Survey uses to divide up the continent by watershed boundaries. So the watersheds shaded here are shaded in darker yellow colors for watersheds where there are more reports for Lesser Celandine, and lighter colors where there's fewer reports, and white in the cases where there might be no reports for Lesser Celandine. And as we zoom into the map, the watershed boundaries start to break down and divide. So at a broad scale, it looks like there's high Lesser Celandine infestation all over. But when we start to zoom in, even to areas like Pittsburgh, where there is a lot of Lesser Celandine, we start to see smaller subwatersheds that seemingly are not yet infested with this plant. And we can continue to zoom in even further, and those watersheds start to break down even more. So we include this in our training, in our resources, as a way to help guide potential Lesser Celandine seekers if they're interested in doing surveys that target early detection and rapid response. So you can see these subwatersheds where there are currently no reports for Lesser Celandine, perhaps visit some of the public area and accessible parts of these to look and either confirm that there's no Lesser Celandine in this subwatershed, or maybe there is some and it's just not reported yet. Maybe it's only a small patch that could be easily eradicated with some coordinated effort. So this will be here for all participants to explore and use as a tool to guide their survey efforts. So although rural parts of Pennsylvania may have few to zero Lesser Celandine populations, this plant has been long established in the urbanized parts of Pennsylvania, for many decades, in Philadelphia, over 100 years at this point. And so although new early detection populations are unlikely to be found around cities like this shouldn't discourage any potential Lesser Celandine seekers within those areas from joining in on the survey efforts. So you don't need to get out and go to some of these rural parts in order to contribute valuable data. And let me explain how. So in these established and well-known Lesser Celandine populations, new data can allow natural resource professionals and researchers to monitor changes in these populations over time. So this could include increases or decreases in the total infested area and information about the novel ways that Lesser Celandine might be interacting with the environment. So the importance of monitoring data is stressed to let potential participants know that you don't need to travel to remote parts of the state and discover these early detection populations to contribute valuable data to this event. However, if you are able to do that, some additional types of monitoring data could be beneficial to collect in early detection scenarios as they establish a baseline of information for new populations. So if you are visiting some of these more established populations, what types of monitoring data can you collect for Lesser Celandine populations, both in established populations and some of our early detection populations? One of these types of data is phenology, which is sort of defined as the timing of vegetative and reproductive events in plants and their relationships with abiotic and biotic factors. So this means things like their flowering time, which might be in relation to the seasonal rainfall or the seasonal temperatures. studying phenology in plants is critical to our understanding of how species are adapting to a changing environment. And so when making records for Lesser Celandine during this event, consider asking and answering some of the following questions, such as what growth stage are the leaves in? Are they developing and unfurling? Are they fully opened? Are they yellowing and senescing, singling the end of the growing period? So what growth stage are the flowers in? Are they still light green buds at the tips of the flowering stems? Are the petals fully developed and yellow but not fully open? Could the flowers be in full bloom? Are the petals dropping? Are fruits even forming once the flower is finished? And lastly, are tubers present in the leaf axils? If so, how big are the tubers? Do they fall off the stem easily? These are all, additional points of data that could be really valuable in any setting where you find lesser celandine. The other type of monitoring data you could collect is ecology data. So collecting additional notes on how lesser celandine might be interacting with other organisms, as well as their habitat, can help us to fully understand the impacts that lesser celandine has on ecosystems. So when making records for lesser celandine during this event, consider asking and answering some of these questions. Are there other plants growing within or around a lesser celandine population? How many different types? Can you identify some of those other plants growing with lesser celandine, and are they native, non-native, or a mix of both? Are insects or other invertebrates present around lesser celandine populations? If so, what kind of insects are you seeing? This could be as simple as saying, I'm seeing some bees, flies, moths, butterflies, beetles, etc. And are they interacting with lesser celandine? Are they visiting the flowers? Are they moving pollen? Or are, lesser celandine flowers completely devoid of any insect interactions? And then lastly, what type of habitat is lesser celandine growing in? Is it growing near some kind of characteristic feature like a stream or a creek? How wet is the soil? Is it inundated? Is it moist? What's the soil made out of? Is it feel muddy or sandy or something else? So this is an example here where you do have lesser celandine intermixed in the background, but also growing amongst a bunch of other plants, both native and non-native. Um, so just a few notes on how to actually record some of that monitoring data when you're making records through IMAP invasives. So the IMAP invasives web map offers a ton of additional data fields to, to add information on, phenology and habitat to a record. And in a bit, Amy's going to, briefly show how you go about making records in the web map as well as the classic mobile app. Now, in the classic mobile app, a lot of those options aren't present or visible in the app. However, there is a text box for observation comments where you can stick any monitoring data that you might collect. So this is an example here where an observer went and saw lesser celandine and left some notes mentioning that the leaves in the population look fully developed. The flowers are developed but haven't opened. It's growing in a forest adjacent to a creek. The soil is wet, moist, but not fully inundated. And there appear to be, 4 other types of plants, but they can't identify them all. But they do know that garlic mustard is one of those. So an important thing to note is that phenology and ecology monitoring data are completely optional and not required to participate in the Lesser Celandine Seekers event. You don't need to feel any pressure to fill out all of these details. It's just an option, if you want to challenge yourself to add some additional observations to your data. So now I'm going to hand it over to Amy, and she's going to explain to you all how to participate in the Lesser Celandine Seekers.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so I just want to go through some specifics related to the IMAP invasives portion of the Lesser Celandine Seekers event. Some of you who are already registered users, this is going to be a refresher for you, and others who might not have accounts already. This is going to be the information you'll need to know in order to participate. So first thing you'll need to do is request an account. This is free to do. You can go to our website, which is paimapinvasives.org, and click on the buttons at the top that say either login or register. And we have some screenshots here directly in the story map that show these steps for you. So you can always go back and reference this as needed. So again, visit our website, click on the login or register. And then once you click on those buttons, you'll see a screen that looks like this, where there is a sign up form. And you just have to fill this out, and that will get you registered with the platform. If you already have an existing IMAP Invasives account, you can just sign in there at the top where the email and password boxes are located. And once you have an account, the next thing you'll want to do is to join the project. So in IMAP, a project is essentially a way to kind of culminate data together so that it's easily searchable in the platform, because we do have a lot of data. And so this is a way for us to just say, this is the data that's being collected as part of this particular event, the Lesser Celandine Seekers. So this is something, in order to join a project, you actually have to do in the online database. You cannot do this on any of our mobile apps. So again, make sure you're logged into the online database in order to join the project. And we'll walk you through the steps of how to do that. But just want to mention here that once you do request to join the project, either Brian or myself will reach out to you after you've made your request and let you know that you have been added to that project. We'll send you an email about that. So again, just want to make sure we're mentioning multiple times that your data does need to be tagged to that Lesser Celandine Seekers 2025 project. That's the title of it. In order to qualify as part of the event. If it is not, then we will not probably recognize that it's part of this particular effort. So if you have any questions about how to do this, or that you might be having some issues of some sort, please feel free to reach out to us, because we want to make sure that your data is being logged appropriately. And just to note, if you registered for the webinar training today and already have an existing IMAP Invasives account, you were likely already added to the Lesser Celandine Seekers project by probably myself. So you can actually go into the project section of your account profile to see if that project has already been added for you. And again, we're going to show you how to do that here with some of the screenshots here in the story map. So in order to actually join the Lesser Celandine Seekers project, you'll want to log into the online IMAP Invasives platform. And then up in the top left corner, you'll see a little hamburger menu that you can click on. And one of the options in that menu is projects that you can click on. And from there, once you click on projects, you'll use the little search box that's provided and type in the name of the project, which is Lesser Celandine Seekers 2025. And it should pop up for you that you can click right on that associated project. From there, once you've clicked on it, it will take you to the profile page for that project. And there is a hyperlink that you can click on that says request to join project. So those are the steps that you'll want to take in order to actually join that project. Again, once you do that, Brian and I will get an email notification, and we'll know to go ahead and confirm you and let you know once you have been added to that. And then if you'd like to check if you're already added to the project, again, if you've already have a registered user account and you register for today's webinar, again, access that main menu from the online database, and then you'll choose the selection for your account. And then once you're in your account, you'll see a section for projects specifically, and look to see if Lesser Celandine Seekers 2025 is already listed there. If it is, you're good to go. You're already, part of the project. If it's not, then you'll want to go through those steps we just outlined above that talk about how to go ahead and request joining that project. So to actually report your findings to IMAP Invasives, we are interested in both presence and absence information. And so in IMAP, that's referred to as presence for when you're finding something, and not detected if you don't find something. In here, in the actual story map, we do have embedded videos that walk you through that process of how to add that data. So you can use whichever type of data platform you prefer. A lot of people that do these kinds of survey events where you're out in the field do like to use our classic mobile app. It's a very quick, easy, simple method that allows you to add data pretty easily. But of course, you're able to use the online platform as well. So we don't have time today to actually watch these videos, but everyone who registered for the webinar today will receive a link to this story map, and you'll be able to watch the videos once you have that resource available to you. So again, we just want to make sure that you are tagging your data to the Lesser Celandine Seekers 2025 project, especially if you're using the mobile app. And so we do have some screenshots here that show you how to do that. So we'll walk through that. So this is what you'll see if you've got the IMAP Invasives mobile app downloaded on your device. And it's pretty easy to get. You just go wherever you get your apps and type in IMAP invasives, and it should pop up easily for you if you don't already have it downloaded. So once you open up the app, it will potentially ask you if you need to refresh your data. So go ahead and say yes to the refreshing of the data. And then once you're actually creating an observation in the mobile app, there is a selection for adding your data to a project. And that's where you're going to want to select that Lesser Celandine Seekers 2025 option, which you can see here in this screenshot. Now, if that project isn't showing up for you in your mobile app, it's probably because you haven't added the project to your online profile via the online database. This happens to a lot of people. We get those questions come through, and we just want to make sure that people know to first add that project to your online database. And then make sure, I believe it's actually a section in the preferences part of the app where you can say retrieve IMAP lists. And that's going to pull all the information from your online profile into your mobile app, including any projects that you're a part of. So again, if anyone has any questions about how to do that or something isn't quite working right, feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to help you through that if needed. So just to note, with the classic mobile app, there is a restriction on just having one photo added per record. We hope to get this changed in the future because we know that the classic mobile app is a really popular tool with a lot of our community scientists. So just keep that in mind, but know that you can add additional photos by searching for and editing your records if you're actually in the online database. You can actually add up to 5 images per record in the online database, but with the app, you're limited to just one. So if you are only adding one photo per record, we do really want to make sure that that photo is a really good photo. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Brian has a section in the story map that talks about that. So again, here's some additional video tutorials that we have here embedded within the story map that talk about how to create a presence record in IMAP invasives. Now, these video tutorials are not specific to the Lesser Celandine Seekers event, but they do walk you through the process of how to create, in this case, a presence record. And then just below this video tutorial is another one that talks about how to create a not detected or an absence record in IMAP. So it's a very similar process. Again, this is how to do so in the online database if you'd like to do it that way. So as I mentioned just a little bit ago, taking really good pictures that show those identifying characteristics of lesser celandine is really, really important as part of this effort. So any and all data that we get in IMAP invasives is always reviewed by species experts to ensure that the species IDs are correct. We really pride ourselves and our program on this aspect of how we do things essentially because we want to make sure that the data that we're receiving is good quality data. So we always make sure that it's expert vetted. And the way that we do that is through pictures that are submitted from the people who are actually out in the field observing these species. And so, again, we're really concerned about making sure that the pictures include distinguishing characteristics of a species. And so, for lesser celandine, for example, that could be features like the flowers or sepals or leaves of the plant. Getting as much of that as you can in an up close, type of photo is really going to be what we're looking for. You might notice at particular locations that lesser celandine might be, a very large population. There might be a very big infestation happening. And so if you have to choose between capturing the infestation versus the distinguishing characteristics in your photo, we're always going to tell you to capture those distinguishing characteristics in your photo and perhaps make note of the size of the infestation in the observation comments in your record. But a way that you can perhaps get both of those things, both the distinguishing characteristics and the size of an infestation in a photo, is actually to kind of get lower to the ground and take a photo at an angle. And Brian has an example here that does just that, where you can get those distinguishing characteristics up close there in the foreground, but you can really see in the background too that there's a lot of other lesser celandine present at this site as well. So it kind of it does both things very well. Another thing to keep in mind is to ensure that your photos are crisp, clear, and in focus. Sometimes we get images from observers that are blurry, they're out of focus, they might be taken from a distance, and it really isn't helpful as far as allowing our expert reviewers to make a species ID from those pictures. So you want to make sure that you're really just slowing down, your camera is steady when you're taking those pictures, and you're being thoughtful as well. Also, you want to make sure that, that lesser celandine is the main subject in your photo. So if it's not the focal point of an image, then its presence can be very difficult to confirm. And so here's another example of that, where we can kind of tell that lesser celandine is here, but it's not really getting that up close, picture that we're looking for that's going to help to make a species ID verification, essentially. And then another thing to consider when you're taking your observation photos is to include things that show the size and scale of the species. So that could be things like your hand, a coin, or a ruler. So things that contain any personal information like a driver's license or credit card, even though they might help to show the scale of the plant, it's not going to be something we want to see in the photo because we don't want you to be giving away your personal information. So this is not required, but it is something that you can do. And again, it helps our expert reviewers when they're making their species ID determinations when looking at your pictures. But in general, just remember that photos are absolutely necessary. So please do not submit a finding for presence information anyway that does not have a picture, because we will not be able to expert that information. Now, if you are submitting not detected information, of course, that is not going to be something that you can include a photo of lesser celandine because you're not finding it, essentially. But what some people do is actually include a picture in a not detected record that shows the site and the landscape of where they are surveying, and that's fine to do. Not detected records don't necessarily have to include photos at all. But again, if you are submitting presence information, please make sure you're including at least one or up to 5 images along with your finding. So a lot of people ask the question, okay, I've submitted some information. Now, how do I go and find it and view it in IMAP invasives? And that's something that you can easily do in the online database that we have. And so if you log in, there's a button near the top that's called Filter Records. So if you click on that button, and then once you click on that, you'll see a table pop up that has a lot of different tabs and different filtering options. But one of the options you can filter on is the project. So if you go to the project section and type in Lesser Celandine Seekers 2025, you'll then be able to apply that filter and see any and all data that's been tagged to the project so far. Part of the filter records tool allows you to turn on various layers that we have in IMAP invasives. And so specific to this project is going to be the presence and also the not detected information. So you want to make sure to turn on or have those toggles activated for all the appropriate confirmed, unconfirmed, and not detected presence and not detected information. Another thing that you can do when you're filtering is if you're only interested in looking at the data that you have submitted so far, maybe you just want to double check that it did actually get submitted to the platform, is to go back to that filter records tool. And then one of the first toggles that you can activate is called filter on your records. So you can activate that toggle. You can further refine that filter search by, again, including the name of the project down in the project section, and then applying that filter, and it's going to bring up just the data that you have submitted so far. Now, it's important to remember that you'll want to make sure you're turning on our unconfirmed data layer when you're looking at this information, because likely it will take us some time to go through and actually expert vet some of this information. So unless you have the unconfirmed, or unless you don't have the unconfirmed data turned on, it might look like your data isn't there when in fact it is. So that unconfirmed is just referring to the fact that some of our information has not been expert vetted yet. And then the confirmed is referring to data that has gone through that expert vetting process. Okay, so we do have some additional information here for you to check out. I know Brian provided some really good information already about Lesser Celandine from his experiences, but we do have some other links here in the story map from DCNR, Penn State Extension, Ohio State University, and also the New York Invasive Species Information website, specifically about Lesser Celandine. There's also an embedded video here from DCNR as well that we would encourage you to check out, become more familiar with this plant. Any and all essentially homework that you can do to familiarize yourself with this is going to help you once you actually are conducting your surveys out in the field. So I'm going to turn things back over to Brian to wrap things up, and then we'll take any questions that have been coming through the Q&A.
All right. Thank you, Amy. So if you do have any further questions about the Lesser Celandine Seekers event, or perhaps just Lesser Celandine in general, you can feel free to contact me. I've included my email and my office number here. I prefer my email, but if you really got to give me a piece of your mind, you can call the office phone, and if I'm in, I will pick up. So with that, I think we can go ahead and look at the questions and answers and see, and start working through these. Amy did already answer one question during the training. Someone asked, will I get a copy of the subspecies list? And so, yes, all registrants are going to receive this story map, which has that list and dichotomous key to all of those different Lesser Celandine subspecies. So yes, you all will have access to that. Next question, how does it help other invasives establish? So yeah, Lesser Celandine being kind of a spring plant and a early season bully will push out other plants that are growing within its habitat. So that includes other plants that are specific to the spring and disappear by the beginning of summer, but it also includes plants that do appear in the spring and stay throughout the year. So it's pushing out plants that are both spring ephemeral and full growing season present. And so by pushing those out and then disappearing itself by the end of spring, it leaves these barren areas where something like Japanese knotweed can then establish, being something that doesn't really pop up until the summer is underway. Great question. Are there any groups mapping Lesser Celandine in Delaware? I do not know, but that would be great if there were. I don't know anyone in Delaware, but I'm sure Delaware has, a Department of Natural Resources or some kind of equivalent that might have more information on that. If not, you could always be mapping stuff in Delaware, using iNaturalist, or they might be a state that uses EdMaps a bit more heavily, which is another invasive species reporting platform. So I don't know, but definitely something to look into. Let's see. Next question. It's frequently mentioned that lesser celandine spreads via water and people machinery. In our area, we suspect it is being spread into non-flooding area by deer hooves, as excessive deer numbers and lesser celandine monocultures are in the same area. Have you seen studies about this possible connection? I have not seen studies about this connection specifically, but that could definitely well be a possibility. I definitely seeing that being possible. Lesser celandine could also benefit from excessive deer browse, where you have deer that are overpopulated and they're eating a lot of the native plants that would otherwise might be able to compete with lesser celandine in overabundance. So deer could be reducing native competitors for lesser celandine and helping to facilitate its establishment that way as well. Great question. We have one question asking, do I want to advise on how to get rid of or keep it from spreading? So we do have, there's a short video embedded in the story map about how to prevent the spread. As far as getting rid of, this event is for, surveying purposes only. If you are interested in trying to get rid of lesser celandine that you find, that is a discussion that you need to have with the whatever land manager or landowner is relevant to the areas where you're doing your surveys. And that's not something we can advise on specifically. Next question. I'm sure that I have some prior recordings of lesser celandine in iNaturalist. Should I try to link these old findings with the current IMAP invasives project? I'll let Amy chime in here, but my gut feeling is probably not to link it to the current 2025 project. You can certainly take those findings if you have them recorded in iNaturalist and make a sister recording in IMAP invasives, and that would be great. But I wouldn't tag anything that wasn't recorded during the duration of this event to the project. Amy, would you agree?
Yeah, Brian, I would agree with that, since this is an event that we're hosting basically in the future, starting in March and then also in April. Any previous findings wouldn't necessarily be relevant to this specific event. But again, if you want to add the data that you've already recorded in iNaturalist and make kind of new manual additions to IMAP, you're certainly able to do that. Right now, we don't have a way to link the two necessarily. We do have the ability to turn on the most recent 5 years worth of data from iNaturalist directly in IMAP. That is a specific data layer that we have available. But over time, as that 5 years elapses, then that data wouldn't necessarily show up in IMAP. So that's why we would recommend, if you really want it to be in IMAP 2, to just create some of those additional records that would be separate from this event.
Thank you. Okay. Next question. I have about a half mile of creek through the property. There are a number of separate groups of lesser celandine within the floodplain. Should I take one photo and list the number of separate groups, or just report as one? I would say that is up to you, and whether you think reporting them all as separate or reporting them as one might be beneficial to you in the way that you might be trying to manage lesser celandine. For the purposes of this event, you only need to submit the one to be considered a participant. But I think that could be up to you how you want to map things on your own property, and what might be most helpful to you in your circumstances. Let's see. Are there cultivars of lesser celandine available at garden centers? A previous owner had planted some things outside my patio that iNaturalist identifies as lesser celandine. If so, are these invasive also? Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe lesser celandine has made its way onto Pennsylvania's controlled plant and noxious weed list, which would mean that within the state of Pennsylvania, it is not legal to sell, distribute this species. Amy's going to fact check me here.
Looking at it
So
right now. I want to say that's correct, but I just want to double check that.
So perhaps, I mean, some point in the past, it wasn't on that list, and I'm sure people were still buying and selling lesser celandine and planting it in their gardens. But probably for the past many years now, that might not be the case. In your circumstance, that is completely possible that the previous owner had planted that on the property. And I would still consider it invasive. I haven't read anything about there being non-invasive cultivars of lesser celandine, especially because pretty much all of its subspecies are able to spread successfully just by vegetation and tubers and don't necessarily need to make seeds to reproduce.
And Brian, just to mention, it is on the Pennsylvania noxious weed list. It's a class B noxious weed. And I would just also mention that, iNaturalist, it does have that really nice feature that helps with identifying a species, but I know it does sometimes make mistakes. And so it could potentially be a lookalike that was found. It might also be lesser celandine. It's hard to say. But just want to mention that for your reference.
Great, thank you. Um, will the celandine be eradicated based on our information? So the purposes of for the purposes of strictly staying in this survey event, no, as PA IMAP invasives, we don't have any kind of authority or jurisdiction to go out and eradicate things based on these findings. However, my hope is that there are people with that jurisdiction and capacity who will be paying attention to the event and will follow up on some of these efforts. And that could also be on our participants to reach out to uh, land managers or other stakeholders that might have that capacity to follow up and conduct eradication. So no, I can't guarantee that anything will be eradicated based on these findings, but I hope that I hope that other people will be able to take up that mantle and do some of the eradication work.
And Brian, just to add to that, if anything, of course, this is a big education and outreach initiative to host this event. And so it really helps to shine a spotlight on this particular species and the need to manage it. It's probably not something that I think a ton of people have on their radar. And so it could be something that this, event helps to boost awareness. And then obviously the management efforts that go along with it. So that is our hope that helps, that whole basically big picture.
Thank you. Okay. If we use the app while on location, can we add more photos using the online account once we are home? Yes, you can do this. If you ever have technical difficulties trying this, feel free to reach out to me and I can help try and solve those. But yes, that is possible. Quick question, with presence and um, I'm sorry, this question is phrased a little confusingly. I will loop back to that in a second. Um, are there any lookalikes to be aware of for the tuber portion of the plant? Um, and there are countless plants that do produce tubers like that. So there would be a lot of lookalikes, and so that's why, for the purpose of this event, we're targeting the stretch of time where there should be at least leaves and flowers accompanying those tubers. I wouldn't recommend trying to identify lesser celandine later on in the year when the leaves and flowers have disappeared, but the tubers might still be visible on those barren patches. So yeah, there are a lot of lookalikes, and because they're going to be very hard to differentiate, we don't recommend trying to survey for lesser celandine without the leaves and flowers present. Um, I already answered this. No, we are not removing lesser celandine as a part of this event. Um, but that could be on participants or other land managers to follow up with the data and organize removal efforts outside of the event. What size area should be considered as one observation? For example, if it stretches for some distance down a stream bank, should we count it more than once? I would say perhaps maybe it is good to know the full extent of how far an infestation stretches. One strategy could be to make a point at its uppermost upstream part, and then once you get to the downstream portion, make another point and note in the comments for both of those points that in between them that there's a pretty heavy lesser celandine infestation throughout. The other option is to make those start and end points and then go back on the website on the web map and draw a polygon of the total area in between those points and represent the infestation area that way.
And something else to mention, we didn't highlight this in our presentation today, but there is another app that is available for use via Survey 123. There is an online tutorial that is available on our PA IMAP YouTube channel that talks about how to use the Survey 123 app. And that app allows you to record points, lines, and polygons, as opposed to the classic mobile app that is just point-based. And so that is a really nice app that allows you to record kind of more advanced data, such as polygons, while you're out in the field. So if you'd like to check that out, like I said, there's a video tutorial that's available online that Brian did. Or you can always reach out to us and we're happy to pass that information on to you. So that is another option to consider as well.
How do we document location with longitude and latitude if using the online form instead of a mobile device? So you would still need some kind of way to, I guess, collect those coordinates out if you're out and about. I mean, you could use something as simple as Google Maps or Apple Maps allows you to take pins. I mean, even you could also just remember the rough area where you were seeing lesser celandine and map that point on the online map. But if you are able to collect, XY coordinates through something like Google Maps or Apple Maps, when you go to the online map, you can then paste those coordinates in and get your point that way. I'm in Central and Eastern PA. Are you interested in data from this region or more focused on Western PA? We want data from all over Pennsylvania. So it doesn't matter what part of the state you're in. We would love to see data coming in from all corners of the state, regardless of whether you have very little lesser celandine or have huge infestations already present. Can I participate if I only participate for one of the 2 months? Yes. I mean, you can simply participate by making one presence record and one absence record at some point within the 2 month stretch. So we have a 2 month stretch to, allow as much flexibility as possible for people to participate. And because this 2 month stretch is the part of time where lesser celandine is going to be easiest to recognize in the field. So, yep, you can, do as much or as little as you want, as long as you contribute, one presence and one absence, I suppose, might be the bare minimum that we'd look for. But really, any data you upload tagged, regardless of, when you took it, as long as it's within that 2 month stretch, counts as participation. Oh my gosh, so many questions. Can I set up an account on an iPad or do I need a larger computer to create an account? I would think you can set it up on an iPad as long as you can access a web browser. You have Opera on an iPad or whatever web browser you're using. As long as you can get on a web browser and go to the website, you should be able to create an account, no problem. I typically don't use Roundup or chemicals for any eradication. On a university site, I read that this case, a very targeted application of Roundup is appropriate. What do you recommend? What I recommend is that if you are going to try and treat or manage lesser celandine, you're only doing it on property where you have jurisdiction or authority to do so, which would be your own property, or if you happen to be a land manager for an organization on the properties that that organization manages. So trying to do a chemical application outside of a property that you don't have any jurisdiction or authority to treat on is not legal. So I can't and so for the purposes of this event, I'm not really recommending that anyone does that. Um, if that's something you're looking to coordinate outside of the event, that is on participants to do so. Um,
We are right at 12 o'clock, so I would say we probably should wrap things up. For any of the questions that we didn't already get to, thanks again for everyone who did ask questions. We will have a record of that, and we can follow up with you via email afterwards and answer those questions for you. So even though we're not answering it live on the webinar, we will be sure to get back in touch with you. But we do probably have to wrap things up now. So I'll hand things over to Brian to do so.
yeah, all right. Like Amy said, there's a lot of lingering questions. Feel free to send those to me via email, which is present in the story map here. And I will scroll down to the bottom to show that again. That's bdags@paconserve.org. And with that, I think we're good to wrap up. All right. Thank you all for coming on today, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of your Lesser Celandine points come through in the next couple months.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.